Well, hello. I'm Janet Morano, the Executive Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to our program, Just Ask Janet. Now, if you have questions, I want you to send them in to me. And today we're going to talk about the polls. Like you just saw in our little intro there, in 2016, the pollsters were wrong. Well, joining me today is a dear friend of mine and Father Pavone's. His name is Dr. Michael New. He's a professor at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., but he has been analyzing polls. Actually, he started doing this, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about it for the pro-life movement, but he also really analyzes the political polls. And right now, I think, especially people who are supporting our president and supporting the election, re-election of the most pro-life president, they're kind of getting nervous about the polls. So right now, let's welcome to our program, Dr. Michael New. Michael, welcome to the program.
Janet, thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. So you were starting to tell me how you first got into analyzing polls. So tell our viewers.
Yeah, sure. In 2004, the Heritage Foundation published a study of mine on the impact of different kind of state-level pro-life laws. And this bit of research was very interesting to pro-lifers. And I realized that the pro-life movement didn't really have a lot of people writing about the social science. And because of my academic background, I have a PhD in political science. I have a master's degree in statistics. I'm familiar with polls. I see a lot of polls. And I thought I had some insightful things to say. So I started writing about polling data, both as it pertains to elections and pertaining to public opinion on pro-life issues. So anytime a poll comes out, especially a poll I think is misleading or confusing, I usually hop on to National Review Online or another conservative or Christian or pro-life website and try to set the record straight.
And so when you look at, like right now with this election, first of all, we can reflect back what happened with Clinton and Trump, right, in 2016. But I mean, explain to our viewers just a little basic, when you look at a poll, what do you look at? Like, how do you determine how valid is this by the sample? Are these likely voters? Are these registered voters? Are these voters who voted in 2016 to now? Give us some of the background about, depending on the poll, what does it really mean?
Well, sure. A lot of the polls that you see getting a lot of media coverage, in my opinion, are really not terribly helpful for a couple of reasons. First off, what general public opinion is not terribly helpful. I really don't care what people think. I care about what voters think. And a lot of these polls just look at the general public. They don't really sort out likely voters. And some of the more sophisticated polls actually look at people who voted previously, because people who voted previously are actually likely to vote again. And I think when you look at these polls of likely voters or previous voters, they indicate a much closer race than some of the other polls. Another reason why a lot of the polls are confusing is because we don't elect the president through a national popular vote. We elect the president through the Electoral College. And,
Right.
National polls pick up a lot of people whose votes, frankly, are not going to be all that pivotal. I mean, very likely Joe Biden's going to win Vermont. It's very likely that Donald Trump's going to win Alabama. The states that are going to make a difference are places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Florida. So it's what's going on in these states is what matters, really not what's happening nationally. So again, when you look at these kind of swing state polls, they give us an indication that the race is much closer than some of these national polls might otherwise indicate.
Right. Well, just this morning, of course, I was zipping on Fox News before coming to work, and I see that still in what we call the battleground states, a lot of these polls are still showing President Trump behind Biden. And what can you say about that? Like the polls are showing, say, like right now, they're saying Pennsylvania, Trump is behind. And what are you seeing?
Well, if you look at what happened back in 2016, the polls also showed that Donald Trump was behind. And the polls turned out to be wrong. That was for several reasons. First off, in 2016, undecided voters and third-party voters at the end of the day decided to broke very heavily for President Trump. That's one thing. Another thing that we know is that when people are contacted by a pollster, sometimes they're inclined to give what they feel is a politically correct or a kind of a socially acceptable answer. And in some parts of the country, some people might be reluctant to tell a pollster that they're voting for President Trump. So I think the polls are kind of understanding his performance for that reason. Also, polls, even though they try to be random, they do oversample some demographics. And I think conversely, undersample certain demographics that are likely to support President Trump. We know that people with kind of college degrees, for instance, are more likely to vote talk to a pollster. And individuals with college degrees are a demographic that skews toward Joe Biden. So again, we know that based on who's willing to talk to a pollster, that could skew the results somewhat. So even though these battleground state polls, some of them show Donald Trump behind, I think we have very good reason to believe that we've learned in 2016, this election again is a lot closer to these polls would indicate.
That's right. Well, of course, I mean, I don't think I've ever been called by a pollster myself, ever. And when I think about what I use as my, what we say, barometer is, I look at President Trump's rallies.
Yep.
I mean, if you've been, I'm sure, Dr. New, you've been watching them, and like, it looks to me like he gets average, easy 10,000 people at a rally, and they're still pouring in, and there's no more room for them. Mm-hmm. And now you look at Biden and Harris, and and even Obama, and they have these little drive-in things. And I saw one that was only 20 cars, and then they claimed the one for Obama had 200 cars. But what's that compared to what we're seeing on the ground? Like right now, following my broadcast, we're probably going to bring live President Trump he's not in Pensacola yet. He's in the Villages here in Florida. In fact, Father Pavone's up there, and he's with Right Side Broadcasting, emceeing that event. And here's President Trump going to not one, but two rallies today, hours, apart, jumping back on Air Force One. And the other side, they have these small little gatherings. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I think there is clearly an enthusiasm gap. And we have polling data that backs that up, that they have asked Trump supporters, are you excited or enthusiastic about voting for President Trump? And they've asked the same thing to people who plan to vote for Joe Biden. And a much higher percentage of Trump supporters say they are enthusiastic about going out on election day and voting for President Trump. And that does make a difference. That an enthusiastic voter is more likely to actually vote. Not everybody does vote. Someone who is unenthusiastic or unmotivated might not vote. Also, someone who's enthusiastic is more likely to volunteer. He is more likely to make a donation. He is more likely to bring friends and family to the poll with them. So, I think the enthusiasm gap is a real issue. You are correct. The Trump rallies are attracting many, many, many more people than the events that, the Biden-Harris campaign is putting on. So, again, I think that, enthusiasm makes a difference in these elections. We saw that in 2016. And again, it may well make a difference again in 2020.
Right. And so we have some comments coming in here. Maybe I'd like to read one to you. It says, Carmen says, so with all these mail-in ballots, the Democratic scheme of cheating, how long are we going to have to wait to find out who wins? What do you think about that, Dr. New?
I really can't predict the future. I will say that, I'm not really comfortable with a lot of these mail-in ballots. I mean, I think an absentee ballot's fine because you request the absentee ballot and it's mailed to you. I really don't like the fact that states are mailing people ballots who aren't requesting them. I think that does open up the door for fraud. But that's so the Republican Party is aware of this. There are lawyers on the ground who will be sure to raise appropriate legal challenges if they think there is a significant amount of vote fraud. One thing I'd encourage everyone to do is that if you're supporting President Trump, make sure he wins by a big margin. If he wins by a big margin, it's not possible to get the result overturned by fraud. So again, I want people to go out, vote, bring friends, bring family, even friends and relatives who don't vote often. We need all hands on deck here. This is like all elections. It's very important. Some people might be inclined to sit this one out. Don't. We need everyone. All hands on deck. If you've never volunteered before, volunteer. If you only just spend an hour calling people, spend that hour. It's well worth your while.
Exactly. Well, Nancy here from Florida just sent a comment in. She said that I'm from Florida and I know 8 ex-Democrats that have voted Republican, and she put go red. Mm-hmm. See that? So that's some of this effect, don't you think? I mean, I know in 2016, what really took President Trump over the top over Hillary Clinton was he attracted a whole group of first-time voters or people who had not voted in an election in over a decade. Wasn't that one of the statistics?
Yeah, absolutely. That basically one of the reasons why the polls were wrong is that they had a tough time figuring out who would actually vote. And Donald Trump was an unconventional candidate. And in many respects, he's kind of an unconventional president. And he attracts kind of a demographic that very often does not vote in elections. And, I can even talk about, members of my own family who never seemed all that interested or enthusiastic about politics, but they told me they literally couldn't wait to run out the door and vote for Donald Trump 4 years ago. And again, these are people who don't, in my opinion, follow politics super closely. They're not political activists, but Donald Trump had a message that they found very appealing. And again, when the election day rolled around, they wanted to jump out the door and vote for the guy. And again, I think the polls don't always pick up people like that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you teach at the Catholic University there in Washington, D.C., correct?
Yes.
And what can you tell us is the atmosphere there for the election right now on campus? Like, what's the attitude on campus? Well, first of all, are they back on campus, or is everything virtual?
Well, we have invited the freshmen and the transfer students to come to campus. So, essentially, for upperclassmen, classes are online. But if you're a freshman or a transfer student, you have been invited to come back to campus. Some have come, some have not. Obviously, the pandemic obviously is kind of putting a little bit of a damper on things. But we have some groups that are active and engaged. The pro-life group Cardinals for Life is still active. They're going to the Planned Parenthood on Saturdays and praying and offering some assistance to those of us who are sidewalk counseling. College Republicans and Young Americans for Freedom are still active. A lot of their events are online, but Young Americans for Freedom did a debate watch party last night. So the students who are here are active and engaged. Obviously, political activism takes a bit of a different flavor during a pandemic, but the students who are involved in politics seem motivated, seem excited, looking forward to the election. And again, I haven't really seen, obviously, that what they can do is a little bit different, but I haven't really seen any real difference in their motivation or their enthusiasm.
And would you say, because you're teaching at a Catholic university, and of course, as you know, they feel like the Catholic vote is kind of, because Biden is a Catholic, that they think more Catholics are going to swing to Biden. What's the sentiment that you get among the Catholic students there at your university?
Well, Catholic University, like a lot of other Catholic universities, does attract a diverse group of students. You do get some people who are very interested in the Catholic faith, but you get people who come because they're interested in one of our academic programs or because they like our location here in Washington, D.C. The one thing I'll say is that when you see these polls of Catholics, the one thing that's very, in my opinion, misleading is that they often don't look at mass attendance all that carefully. That sadly, there are a lot of Catholics out there who do not attend Mass on a weekly basis. So when you look at kind of people who are like weekly Mass attendees, this is a demographic that's skewing very heavily toward President Trump. It's kind of the Christmas and Easter Catholics that tend to be a constituency of Joe Biden. So amongst those students and just among people I know in general who are frequent Mass attendees, they're very pleased with President Trump. They appreciate the great work he's done on sanctity of life issues. They're looking forward to voting for him. It's kind of these lukewarm Catholics who attend Mass around Christmas and Easter, but don't show up much during the rest of the year. They're a demographic that kind of is skewing toward Joe Biden.
Right. And so therefore, Dr. New, when they talk about the Catholic vote, unless they incorporate the part you just said about regular Mass attending Catholics, as opposed to someone who just says, I'm Catholic because you were baptized a Catholic, raised a Catholic, and then who knows what happened there. I mean, even myself, I went away from the Catholic Church for 20 years, but I never stopped identifying as a Catholic. Of course, now I've been back for over 25 years with the church. But you know what I'm saying? I get that there's just, even I'm sure Vice President Biden himself, we wouldn't, necessarily, how can he identify as I guess I hate to use the faithful Catholic, practicing Catholic, I don't know what you want to call it, but you can't, like he has 100% pro-abortion voting record and then claim to be in line with the Catholic Church, right?
Right. Essentially, he's complicit in evil if he's supporting abortion, which he has done through his votes. He's, that's a mortal sin. And I think that, he obviously is welcome to attend Mass, but I don't think someone in his position should be presenting himself for communion. Right. I think even worse, not only does he think abortion should be legal, he thinks it should be funded with taxpayer dollars. That he has changed the position on the Hyde Amendment, that he, like a lot of Democrats, did support the Hyde Amendment as a senator. So even though he thought abortion should be legal, there was a point in time where he at least thought it shouldn't be funded with federal taxpayer dollars. Now that's changed. He now opposes the Hyde Amendment. And that's a very important issue, that if he's elected president and the Democrats win a majority of seats in the House of Representatives, you could see the Hyde Amendment go by the wayside. And my research and the research of others shows the Hyde Amendment saves tens of thousands of lives every year. that once you start funding abortion with taxpayer dollars, abortion numbers goes up. And my calculations show that Hyde saves 60,000 lives every year. So we got tens of thousands of lives at stake based on the outcome of this election.
That's right. That's right. All right, we have another question here. Raji O'Hara said, sad to see race baiting is now the primary concern of the Democrats. Would you agree?
I'm not sure it's a primary concern. Unfortunately, I think abortion, sadly, is the primary concern of the Democrats. It's a party that just seems to be moving, leftward and leftward on sanctity of life issues. I think it's once upon a time you had Democrats at least willing to oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. President Clinton signed appropriations bills with the Hyde Amendment. President Obama signed appropriations bills with the Hyde Amendment. But that's changed now. You have a lot of Democrat elected officials now who, again, not only think abortion should be legal, they think it should be funded with, again, federal taxpayer dollars. That's a position that I think is out of step with most Americans, even out of step with a lot of people in the Democratic Party. I think that Democrats need some candidates who are going to stand up for the sanctity of life. I think these candidates would do better than a lot of people think. I was really hoping that somebody would emerge. That person probably would not have won a lot of primaries, but would have given the millions of pro-life Democrats out there a voice. And again, I think we need some people to show some leadership and try to win some elections and give the millions of pro-life Democrats out there a voice.
Yeah, and when you think about it, isn't it true that Vice President Biden, as a senator, he did vote to keep the Hyde Amendment, and now he's totally flipped on that. He's promised he's going to help get rid of it, right? So that's a real flip-flop, right?
Yep. But for Joe Biden, if you kind of look at his career, he's kind of just followed kind of the public opinion within the Democratic Party. That at one point, the mainstream position for a lot of Democrats was abortion should be legal, but by and large, not funded with federal taxpayer dollars. But there's been some demographic shifts in the Democratic Party that, for a long time, part of the kind of coalition of the Democratic Party included a lot of kind of older Catholic voters who came of age during the Great Depression or World War II. These voters tended to be, somewhat liberal on economic issues, but socially conservative. So it made sense for a lot of Democrats to kind of reach out to these voters, and at least if they weren't pro-life, they at least offer to support the Hyde Amendment. Sadly, that generation of Democrats is kind of passing away. If you were 10 when the Great Depression happened, you're in your late 90s or over 100 now. So an older generation of more quote-unquote conservative Democrats has kind of passed away and being replaced with a generation that's kind of a lot more secular and a lot more liberal on these social issues. That people who support legal abortion tend to vote very heavily in Democratic primaries. Biden won to win the Democratic Party's nomination, this past election cycle. So he moved to the left and flip-flopped on the Hyde Amendment. It's just been tragic.
Right. And didn't you find, Dr. New, that during the primary debates there, when we had, I don't know, about 12 Democrats on the stage, I found it amazing how they were kind of climbing over each other as to who loved abortion more, and finally they're at the point where now, they're just saying abortion up till birth, no problem, no biggie, right? I mean, isn't that the point we've gotten to?
Yeah, then again, there was very little, almost no variation, really. I mean, there was not one major Democratic candidate who came out in favor of the Hyde Amendment this past election, who running for president, who came out in favor of the Hyde Amendment. Right. A couple of them made some statements, vague statements about considering a ban on very late-term abortions, but, typically what they propose are health exemptions that would, render these kinds of limits kind of toothless. So it was interesting. I mean, you had literally 20 Democrats running for president. A lot of them were not serious contenders for the nomination. You would think that just political self-interest, somebody would want to do something different. You're not going to break out of the pack doing what everybody else is doing. You might break out of the pack and do something different. And again, we've calculated there's tens of millions of pro-life Democrats out there who really aren't being represented by anybody. You'd think that some ambitious Democrat would, try to do something a little bit different and get some of those people to vote for him. That 20 million votes goes a long way in a primary. And again, it's not like that candidate would win the nomination, but it would give those pro-life Democrats, a real voice and some visibility and maybe a chance to win elections down the road.
Right. And then as far as polling companies concerned, there's so many out there that you hear. Is there one or two polling companies that you would say when you see their predictions for this election, you would say to them, well, I would trust them a little bit more because of fill in the blank reason. Are there any companies that you would say are better than others?
I think Rasmussen is a pretty reputable pollster. I think they're worth paying attention to. I may mispronounce their name, but the Trafalgar Group, Trafalgar, they actually got the 2016 election correct. They try to do
Really?
different things to, or very close to it. They were probably the most accurate pollster, and they're predicting that President Trump is doing a lot better than the other pollsters. They're kind of well aware that, Trump voters are reluctant to talk to pollsters. Sometimes they make it clear that the poll is automated. They think if a poll is automated and people are not talking to a live person, they're going to reveal their preferences more accurately. So they have kind of some ways to try to really tease out people's real opinions and not, avoid situations where people are just saying what a pollster might want to hear. So I think that's a pollster worth keeping an eye on. And again, they are predicting that Trump is doing better than a lot of the other pollsters out there.
Right. Well, I know what you mean when you say like, oh, well, some people who are voting for Trump are kind of not saying it. And I see that's true even with people who put out yard signs. I know people live in a whole bunch of different states. And like, for example, here in Florida, I live in Brevard County, which is one of the most conservative counties in the state. And so I've got 2 yard signs out there for Trump and one for the sheriff here, Ivy, and no problem, But I have friends who, I posted a picture on Facebook, and I had some friends actually say to me, oh, in my state, I won't put that sign out. Matter of fact, my good friend Mary up in New Jersey, she said, Janet, I can't. The Biden signs are all over my town. If I put that out, I'd be afraid of getting a brick thrown through my window. So there is this fear of the other side, like that they want to attack someone who says they're voting for Trump, right?
Yeah, I think there is a lot more kind of social pressure now than there was previously. That I think politics has become very polarizing. People I think are not inclined to think well of their opponents. Again, I think that we live in a very polarized country, and I think that again people are a lot more reluctant to publicly state their views about political issues. So again, I do think there are some quote unquote hidden Trump supporters that some of these polls are not picking up on.
Yeah. Now, a couple of people have been asking us questions, Dr. New, about like how soon do you think we're going to know, if this election, are we going to really know? Like traditionally, I always stay up to watch the results. 2016, I was up, I think it must have been around midnight when Trump took, I think it was once he took Ohio, I knew we were going to like sweep the rest of the board there. It was kind of like a sign of victory. What do you think is going to happen? First of all, I'm going to stay up to watch, but you think we're going to get the results enough to really declare victory on the night of November 3rd? Or are we going to wake up in the morning and still not know? What do you think?
It's hard for me to make a prediction. I mean, I think this will be a close election. Could come down to states where people have to count absentee ballots and there may be allegations of voter fraud. I think people do need to become mentally prepared for that. But I will say this, 44 years old, I've been probably following, presidential politics closely since the 1992 election. I think pretty much every election but 2000, I've went to bed knowing who the winner was. There was this past election, 2016, most people were pretty sure that Trump was going to win, but there was still a little bit of uncertainty, I think, on election night. I think that, people thought that if the trends continued, he was going to win. He did win. So again, I think that just looking at kind of the history, very often we know election night who the winner is. I think that anything is possible. I do think that people are prepared for a close election. I do know the Republican Party has trained election lawyers who will be quick to look for cases of fraud in states that are close. But I think there is a good chance we will know the winner the evening of November 3rd.
That's great. That's great. Okay, one final thing. If people are going to look at any polls between now and election night, do you have any recommendations what to ignore or just ignore the polls and just go vote? What would you say?
First off, just don't get discouraged no matter what. I mean, polls can be misleading. They can be confusing. Again, if you believe the polls 2016, you would have thought Hillary Clinton had it in the bag, and she didn't. So I would say that whatever the polls show, don't get discouraged. Vote. That's right. Even if President Trump is not doing well in your state, vote for him anyway. Even if you live in a blue state where it looks like Biden is going to win by a large margin, I can guarantee you that even if President Trump won't win your state, you may have good statewide candidates that deserve your support. You certainly have good local candidates that deserve your support. So the better that President Trump does, even these blue states, that does help pro-life people, running in state and local races. So I encourage everyone to vote. I'd say if you can't help yourself and want to look at the polls, pay close attention to the swing state polls. The national polls, in my opinion, just are not terribly helpful. Again, we don't elect the president through a national vote.
Right.
We it's the Electoral College, and we need to think about places like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Florida. These are kind of the key states, I think, where the election will be decided. But again, whatever happens, whatever you hear between now and next Tuesday, don't be discouraged. Work as hard as you can, vote, bring friends to vote. Again, the polls can be misleading, they can be distracting. We just have to focus on doing our job and doing it well.
Right. And let's not forget that there's a third of the Senate up for re-election and
Absolutely.
the entire House. And I know, for example, Dr. New, over in California, there's 7 House seats that we have very, very good pro-life Republicans running. And those races are getting tighter and tighter. So what you're saying, I think, is very true. Even if you think you live in what's called a quote, quote, blue state, that you think Biden's going to take it. So what? Go out and vote for Trump and go right down that red line. And who knows, you might pick up a few House seats for pro-life, right?
Absolutely. Again, there's good local candidates everywhere. And even, below Congress, even state legislatures, state senators. I mean,
That's
they
right.
have a lot of impact on the policy as well. And, we need to keep getting them. One of the reasons why we've passed a lot more pro-life laws in recent years is because Republican and pro-life candidates have done very well in a lot of state legislatures. We've flipped a lot of state legislatures from Democrat to Republican. That makes it much, much easier to get these protective laws passed. So
That's right.
again, no matter where you live, make sure you vote. Even if you don't think President Trump has a chance to carry your state, vote anyway. You'll be helping out down the ballot candidates who deserve your support.
Exactly. Well, Dr. New, I want to thank you for joining me tonight and this afternoon, actually, and all the best. And of course, I'll see you at the next Pro-Life Leaders event, because we always get together at those events. So thanks and God bless.
If anybody has any questions, they can follow me on Twitter, and I tweet out commentary analysis, and I'm happy to interact with anybody online. So keep the great work, keep putting a culture of life, and God bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, brothers and sisters, before we go, I just have a few more reminders for you. This is probably about the last weekend that we can get these out to you on Monday. So you need to place an order today for our party comparison. And this is, again, where it shows the Republican and Democratic Party right from their party platform. You can go to our online store, prolifeproducts.org, and these are absolutely free of charge for you. Our gift to you to get them out there, like Dr. New said, now's the time to push out the vote. And this party comparison, like I said, it takes it right from the party platform on several issues like Planned Parenthood, human life, judges, school choice, sex ed, and foreign assistance. So party comparison in English and Espanol. So request that from us. And of course, we can't forget prayer. And at our prolifeproducts.org store, we also have the prayer card. And finally, I want to remind everybody, I'm going to be wearing this on Election Day. And it says, pray for 45, our president, President Trump. He's the 45th president of the United States, and we want to pray for President Trump. So get to our store, prolifeproducts.org. My staff will be working all weekend and getting the orders out to you as soon as possible. And we've got everything we got to do right now is vote, vote, vote. Once you vote, your job's not done. You've got to get as many other like-minded people out to vote, because every vote is going to count. And I want to see a red wave going across our nation. So thank you for joining us. Again, this is Just Ask Janet. Until next time, God bless.